Hello, and welcome to this episode of the Curious Advantage podcast. My name is Simon Brown, and today I'm here with my co-author, Garrick Jones. We have no Paul today, unfortunately. So we're delighted, though, and really excited for this episode to be joined by Art Kleiner. So Art is a writer, a strategist, and a thought leader in organizational learning, leadership, and responsible technology. So warm welcome, Art.
Thank you so much, Simon, and good to meet you, Garrick. I'm really glad to be here.
So a warm welcome to the Curious Advantage podcast, Art. So a little bit about Art. He's co-author with Juliet Powell of the AI Dilemma, 7 Principles for Responsible Technology. He teaches at New York University, exploring how human systems and emerging technologies intersect. And our regular listeners will know those are topics that are of great interest to us on this podcast. He's former editor-in-chief of Strategy Business. He's also the author of The Age of Heretics, a history of the radical thinkers who reinvented management, and Who Really Matters, the core group theory of power, privilege, and success. He was also editorial coach of a book that had a personal impact on me, The Fifth Discipline, which is arguably one of the most influential books on learning organizations. And he was also co-author of another book I have on my bookshelf, The Fifth Discipline Field Book. So lots that I've already learned from Art. His work spans decades of insight into how organizations think, learn, and evolve, and how curiosity, empathy, and systems thinking can guide us to use technology responsibly. So maybe let's start with curiosity, Art. So as that's at the heart of our podcast, how would you personally define curiosity, and what do you think about curiosity?
I think curiosity is the willingness to entertain, as Shakespeare put it, items that were not in our philosophy before. And it is a discipline of mind, and it is also a natural element of the way children work. And oddly enough, right now, we're experiencing with Gen AI a tool for amplifying curiosity. I think of all the things that it is, slated to do or championed for doing or accused of doing, raising our ability to get instant satisfaction to our curiosity is one of the things that AI does best. It doesn't always do it accurately, but allows us to get a very quick take, including, when we're curious about the context of things. Not just what's the answer to this question. I might say something like, in 2050 in Africa, that's where most of the people, entry-level job applicants will live, because that's the way the demographics are going. Before, we would spend hours trying to figure out what part of that is significant and true and how it would affect us. And AI sums it up. Accurately or not, it gives us a launching pad to exercise our own curiosity further.
You've been the author of so many books and co-author and involved with so many books that we admire. And we got to be careful this doesn't become too much of a fan club and then we remain a little critical. But I'm really fascinated by how curiosity has guided your work. How do you think it's important for exploring leadership and responsible technology over the years?
I think it's always been my driver. So, for example, I wrote The Age of Heretics, which is a history of alternative management. It's a history of good management. And when I was working with Peter, helping him develop the fifth discipline, I noticed he was writing about shared vision, and it wasn't really clear where these ideas of bringing people together and talking about our common future, where did that come from? Who started it? It was pure curiosity that led me to ask around and follow a trail that ultimately led back to the social scientists of the 1930s. But, I had no idea. Similarly, with the AI dilemma, that started with my co-author, Juliet Powell, who was at Columbia University pursuing a degree, and asked, can we trust these big tech companies to be responsible about the way they, to regulate themselves? Can we trust them? And she started asking around. And ultimately, the answer was no, we can't trust them. But then what? If we can't trust these large companies and we can't really regulate them or govern them, how does, in any kind of conventional way, because the technology is moving too fast. What do we, humanity, do, and who is that going to affect? These are examples of curiosity that just lead people to follow a path that ultimately leads either to a question being answered or more likely to more questions.
So exactly to that, I mean, even what you said there has spurred lots of questions. So let's maybe, before we dive into those, let's go back to the big picture around the AI dilemma. So from those conversations with Juliet, tell us around, what is the AI dilemma around? What really was behind you writing it?
And I'm going to pay tribute first to Juliet just in two ways. First, I said, I think you have a book there, and Juliet asked me to co-author it with her. It was one of the great gifts of my life. And then Juliet herself passed away suddenly and tragically, we think from bacterial meningitis just a few months ago. So I just want to acknowledge that. When you talk about a software system or a field of software like artificial intelligence, which, by the way, artificial intelligence means capable of doing things that if a person did them, we would think was intelligent. That's all the how of the technology doesn't really mean, it has a theory or mind or, other things we associate with intelligence, but the outcomes appear intelligent enough of the time that that's the phrase that's come into common use. And one of the things that AI systems do is they act autonomously. They act on their own, which means that they are not always following direct human commands in the same way that we would think others do, machines would do. So therefore, we need to understand the unintended consequences of what they do. So we called these 7 principles for responsible technology. In retrospect, I think we missed a big one, but the 7 that we have are to be intentional about risk, to really, yes, there's always going to be risk in technology. Every tool has risks, but let's pay attention to the risks and know in advance what we're trying for and what risks we're taking. We called it open the closed box, but it's the whole aspect of explainability. Can you query an AI system about what it's doing and what it's telling you? And more importantly, can you query the company that put it out about the same thing? We have a principle which we called reclaim data rights for people. When you are tracked, information about you is tracked. Do you control where that information is used? Do you have the rights to it? If people are getting paid for your data, do some of that kick back to you? Do you have any say whatsoever? Are there the tools available to make that happen? It's a big shortcoming in AI technologies right now. Then confront and question bias. And we can talk about how biased AI systems are. But my favorite example is one from a student at NYU. She's a Chinese student, and she asked one of the Chinese image generators to create a picture of a woman taller than a man. That's all she said in the prompt. And the Gen AI image creator came back with 2 people at a wedding. The man is taller than the woman's. No, she said, no, a woman taller than a man. Came back with another woman taller, with another man taller, No, I mean, the woman is taller. It took her 6 tries and she never did get the image to come out in that way. Its bias was so ingrained from the data it had drawn on that it could not answer that question accurately. And we see that all the time. Ask for a successful executive, you'll get a white male. Ask for an executive on the point of being fired for corruption, you'll get a darker skinned person, probably older, maybe female, based on, the experience I have. They keep trying to improve it. So that's the 4th. The 5th is hold stakeholders accountable, which basically means that when systems harm people, the people who develop those systems should be held to account. And we have hair-raising stories about that. And then favor loosely coupled systems, which is about the organizations. It turns out that organizations that are tightly entwined, where everybody in charge is only a few people in charge and they're all from the same background and they all connect with each other only and eschew outside influences, those tend to be producing more harmful work. Those tend to, they're less capable at managing the uncertainties and dilemmas around AI. And then the seventh one is to embrace creative friction, which is the last thing that a computer developer wants to hear. There's one of the famous books on user interfaces is called Don't Make Me Think. And what we argue is that AI systems, in fact, they're okay at raising productivity under certain circumstances. They're possibly okay at innovation. They're not yet okay at acting autonomously, but what they're really good at, what they're great at, is helping people think.
Yep.
If we use them as mirrors on our own reflective processes, they can address the habits of thought and the habits of action that we're afraid to or unable to address ourselves. And they can do it in a way that really gets to people. So it's no coincidence that people are using AI systems Gen AI systems for guidance, counseling, coaching. Tell me what I haven't thought of. Tell me what, play the part of this person I'm trying to sell to and tell me what you really think of me. All those kinds of things Gen AI excels at because we're using it as a kind of cognitive mirror. So those are the 7 principles. You're probably curious about the one I left out.
Yeah.
Exactly. That's both our next question, I think.
So this is one of those things where it's like we left out misinformation.
Okay.
We mentioned copyright under the issues of risk. And I guess it sort of fits under explainability. It's related to that. But the deliberate and consistent and kind of baked in capacity to mislead, misinterpret, flatter people, tell them what they want to hear, but what's not necessarily accurate. We didn't see that as quite the pernicious issue that it would become. If we published the book 6 months later, it would have been a chapter of its own.
Yeah. And of those, is there one that is particularly, this is the one we absolutely need to pay most attention to, or are they all super important and we need to address all of these?
Well, of course, they're all super important. But I think so. It's a little bit like democracy. The one thing that, if you can't do that, you can't have any of the others, is open the closed box, explainability. If you can't reliably query a tech company on what it's doing and why it's doing it, then all the other principles are vulnerable because you just don't know. And right now, for instance, the European Union's AI Act is built around explainability. In the same way that in the United States, financial regulations like Sarbanes-Oxley were built around explainability. And it's the same mechanism. Companies have to hire auditors to look at their practices. And they have to live with the fact that they're paying these auditors, but the auditors are supposed to be independent. And, this whole question of can you open the closed box to any system is probably it may well be the most vital question, political, economic, and social question right now.
A couple of months ago, there was the AI 2027 paper that we spent a couple of weeks sort of diving into and contemplating. And I remember one of the things in there was around AI reaches a level where it has its own language and you no longer have that visibility of what it's thinking about. And then not long after that, there was a video floating around of a hackathon where a couple of developers created something called Gibberlink, which was a machine-to-machine language that allowed AIs to communicate with like 10% of the time that it takes to use the human language. And so suddenly it was like, okay, the AI 2027 had this futuristic vision where we lose control of AI because it has its ability to think in the black box. And then we have a technology that shows it able to communicate in a way that we can't track what it's communicating. Do you see that it's realistic that we create this open box so that we can see what's happening and we do have that transparency and visibility into what's going on?
Geoffrey Hinton, one of the fathers of AI, famously compared large language models to toddlers. He said, a toddler says cat. You can't ask the toddler how it knew to put that word with that animal. And in that sense, it doesn't matter whether they have a language or not. They're sifting through millions of possibilities and determining a probability that is most likely to get you to say, thank you, that's what I wanted. In that sense, the systems are ultimate people pleasers, never answering your question based on the logic, but answering your question based on the multitude of options. Therefore, they can't be queried in an ordinary way. What you can do is measure the output versus the intention. And you can do that regardless of what language it speaks if the company is open to you doing that. Well, look, David Cantor, the family therapist, said, there's three types of organizations and three types of ways in which we believe organizations should be. So in a closed organization, like an authoritarian system, you follow the boss. Whatever the boss says is what's most important. In an open system, like a republic, or, a kind of a consensus-based organization, you follow the law. There are rules, and no matter if it's the boss or not, the rules come first. The rules carry authority. But in a random organization, like a jazz band, if a symphony orchestra is closed and, you follow the conductor, a chamber music ensemble is open and you follow the consensus. In a random organization, you follow whoever's doing the most interesting thing at the moment. You kind of follow the artist. I think a lot of what we think of as authoritarian systems are actually random systems. And tech companies, by culturally, certainly, are random systems. Whoever is doing the most interesting thing at the moment is where we're going to put our energy. And therefore, in a random system, if you want it to be open, you have to make being open the most interesting thing it could possibly be doing at that moment. And truly open people hate that. I shouldn't have to make it interesting. You should just follow the rules because the rules are the rules. But people don't like to live that way. Some people like to live that way, but a lot of people really want to live, I don't want to think about things. I want there to be an authority in whom I trust. And then there are people who, I just want to do the thing that feels good at the moment and that is exciting enough that I'm going to be caught up in it. And I think we are in the age of random people
Mm.
and random institutions and random society. And in AI, it's turning out, there was a form of AI that was based on rules that was the sort of the expert systems tradition where they tried to codify the logic of how to make decisions and classify things. That was a closed system. There was a sort of an idea about AI that it would glean, appropriate behavior from the behavior of human beings. And that was a kind of an ideal. But what we have is random AI making decisions based on what's the most interesting thing that the conventional wisdom would think is interesting.
Mm.
And I'm not sure how it's going to play out.
Is that so random? Is it chaotic? And if it's chaotic, does it lead to a chaotic outcome?
Well, I think Cantor would say that any of the three can be chaotic or what's the opposite of chaotic? Orderly. You can have orderly random systems where, and a good example of that is an atelier or one of these
Small boutique type
a boutique or like a social
workshop.
system, like when Tolkien and C.S. Lewis and others met, or the Bloomsbury Group, that was a random, orderly system.
Yes.
But the random, chaotic systems is when you have multiple people who decide they want to be the artistic genius, and they're not transparent with each other or with the world at large. You can also have chaotic open systems. If I'm an overrun bureaucracy, overrun with regulations, that's chaotic in its own way.
Yeah. You write about we talk about curiosity, living systems, system thinking, and empathy. And of course, I want to explore a little bit more about the living systems and the systems thinking, why that's really so important to what we're doing and how we teach the next generation and so on, and clear understanding of the living systems. But empathy, why is empathy so important to you?
It's important because it is a trigger to the kind of behavior. I'm just realizing very few people question their own empathy. They all question the empathy of everybody else. And, there's actually different types of empathy. There's a professor at Stanford named Jamil Zaki who has identified, different types of empathy have very different effects. Like I can be totally empathetic in the sense of knowing what you're thinking and why you're thinking it, which is called having a theory of mind. Autistic people have a hard time with having a theory of mind. But I could have a theory of mind about you. Here's why Garrick is doing the things he's doing. And I could use that ruthlessly to try to manipulate you, and it would still be a kind of empathy. I could also do the kind of, the old Bill Clinton thing of I want to stand in your shoes. I could imagine, I could feel your pain. I could know what it's like to be you, Simon, and recognize, and feel your joy as well, and have that kind of associative empathy with you, and yet do nothing to help you.
Yeah. So
And
there's no value judgment or moral judgment related to the empathy. There's no implication that that is a good thing. It's neutral. It's
well,
simply,
and the AI systems can emulate those two kinds of empathy.
mm,
They can, and AI systems can understand people better than most people understand people, especially when it comes to specific individuals, because they can pick up a whole pattern of behavior and draw conclusions from it. AI systems can empathize in the sense of, I know what you're going through, and they can reproduce your life struggles better than you can. In fact, there's an amazing AI system developed by an innovator named Pau Garcia in Spain. He works with refugees, and he has this system where he develops, the refugees have left behind photographs and artifacts and anything that would allow them to remember the past they left behind. But he uses AI systems to visually recreate it, recreate the feeling of the communities they left and the relationships they had. And it turns out to be immensely comforting. So AI systems can do all that, but what they can't do is the third kind of empathy, which is when I say, I see what's going on with you, and I care enough that I'm going to change my behavior. I'm not going to do it because somebody else is telling me or because there's a moral arbiter. I just know that from here on in, I've seen your struggles and I'm going to change the way I live accordingly because I can't bear it. AI systems cannot do that.
So that's the very secret trait of caring.
Yeah, it's very, and interestingly, people anthropomorphize AI systems. We attribute human behavior to them. And one of the things we attribute most is that they care. And that's how people fall into these traps. The articles about people who have attempted or committed suicide or have taken really bad advice based on what an AI system has told them. The desire to feel that this amorphous algorithm actually does care for us is we are very susceptible to it as humans. Many humans are.
what do you think about the Isaac Asimov foundation rules? And how are we doing? First do no harm and don't harm humans. And
Right. What is it? It's don't harm humans, don't do anything that could harm humans, and don't talk about.
you don't talk about Fight Club.
I always think about Chris Argyris's thing. No, it's Gregory Bateson's definition of schizophrenia, which
Yeah.
is you have a crisis or a problem in your family and you can't talk about it, and don't talk about the fact that you can't talk about it. In a way, I think it would be great to get people to follow Asimov's laws for robots, and if people could do it, then I think AI systems could do
I mean,
it.
there's a sort of unspoken gap that we've been talking about here, which is about the moral requirement about the outcome. There is a moral or a We want the right outcome for humans. You say we can take a neutral approach around empathy. Empathy itself can be empathetic, but it can be used for harm, or it can be used for dark outcomes, if you like. Do you think there's a new religion or a new morality that's required? And how do we achieve that if, the classic problem with humans is, going back in philosophy to like hume and so on, is that we always tend to head for the base, whereas humans tend to head for the bottom when it comes. You can guarantee that people will be acting in their own self-interest rather than in the interest of the collective, if you like.
Well, as it happens, I have my own frame on this, but I will say that I don't think it's a fully educated frame. It's one that I believe is true, but it could be challenged. So in the past, there's basically four attitudes that I think have shifted. Well, one that has held steady, but is not followed in the breach, which is the golden rule: do unto others as you would have them do unto you, or do
Yeah.
not do unto others as you would not have them do unto you. That has been with us through human history. I think with the Enlightenment, well, with Christianity and other traditions dated to around that time, came the idea that all humanity is of value. No matter who your parents were, what your circumstances, race, religion, all that stuff, people are of value because they are people. And that is an idea that, in my view, has been kind of picking up breadth of adherence. More and more people ascribe to that idea. So much so that that when people say, even now in the United States, when people say, some groups, some ethnic groups are just no good, it is shocking. There's a shame associated with voicing that idea. There's a movement to take back, bias of that sort. But the number of people who believe that people are of value for being people has grown steadily and is perhaps reaching a tipping point. That would be very nice around the world. I don't think it's anywhere near, but it's growing, even with all the backlash against it. So that's one. It's now fashionable. To believe that all people are worthy of respect, no matter what. Not worthy of respect as individuals, but the fact that they're human is worthy of respect. The second really came about with the Enlightenment and with the technologies associated with the Enlightenment, particularly the automobile, the railroad, communications technologies. And this is the idea that people have choice and that choice is a good thing. It's very much an Enlightenment idea. Indigenous cultures tend to not follow this idea, but I think a lot of what we see as, the expanding middle class around the world is allied with or correspondent with people recognizing I don't have to be in an arranged marriage. I can marry who I choose. I can have the profession I choose. I can go where my interests take me, and I can go where my heart sends me. I can follow my bliss, as it were. That idea is also relatively new. It goes with something, which is that to follow your bliss, you have to do some work to set up the kind of life that will allow you to do that. And, so there's some nuance to the idea that I have choice, and not everybody likes it, but most people in most circumstances, given the choice of whether to pursue choice, will pursue choice.
Yes.
They may not want the consequences, going into debt or whatever it may be, but they will pursue it. And a lot of our entertainment media is about imagining what it would be like if we had more choice. So that's the second. And I think that's been hitting a tipping point now worldwide. In the United States, it hit a tipping point around the 1930s, kind of the aftermath of the Depression, in maybe starting with the Gilded Age. In the around the world, it's hitting a tipping point now. And then the third is so recent, it's hard to believe that it's taken hold the way it has, but it's the idea that people should grow up without trauma. And it emerged from studies of PTSD and soldiers being psychologically wounded after wars, the lost generation, all of that. But really in the 80s, with the studies of PTSD after the Vietnam War, suddenly the psychological conclusion that people are bruised from childhood became prevalent. and it shouldn't be this way. And so, if I were to come on here and say, I beat my children when they were young and I'm proud of it, which couldn't be further from the truth. But if I said that and I stood by it, that would be regarded as shameful.
Yep.
I couldn't do that and keep my head up in polite company, except in, except in circles that are almost defined by that concept. That is a change. My parents, who came of age in the 40s, 30s and 40s, they could have said that and nothing would have, there would have been no shame associated with it.
I have to tell you, I went to a school where caning was still a thing. So it's pretty recent. I'm not that old.
Yeah, but if your children heard that, they would
Horrified.
think it barbaric.
Yeah, absolutely.
And that is a big change in human attitudes about humans. And it has consequences I don't think we really fully see, mostly benign consequences. But, and then it raises, if children should not be raised in a disturbing environment, well, what about other disturbing environments?
Yeah.
Do we have a mutual need to prevent humans from being harmed? And being harmed is open to interpretation. We don't want humans to be coddled. We want them to be challenged and to grow and develop in the face of stress. And so then where does that leave us culturally? And interestingly, AI system, it takes us back to that very first, AI dilemma. How do you be intentional about the risks you take when our awareness of unintended consequences is so uncertain? So
Yeah.
when I think, so your question of, are we at a tipping point in humanity? I'm persuaded that these three trends represent a kind of tipping point. I don't know if this is cyclical, has humanity been here before, or whether it's evolutionary. I've been reading a book by Brian Swim called Cosmogenesis recently, in which he argues that this has been intentional all along, this type of evolution from the Big Bang onward. As the universe moves towards greater and greater complexity, whether it's, an intelligence being intentional, there's an intentionality into this type of evolution, and we're just at a tipping point right now.
You mentioned the middle class and the growing middle class, and these are all symptoms of a advanced and an advancing society and advancing culture where people have more free time, people have perhaps more money, people are more prosperous in some way, and that's growing around the world. And we're seeing the implications of that, and the impact on resources and so on. Do you think, what's your view on the fact that AI is going to decimate the middle classes, that AI is coming just at a time where, the professional classes are being wiped out by, the legal systems are being replaced by AI, medical systems and medical decision-making can be replaced by AI. So, all of the kind of the bedrock of an educated middle class that's growing is going to be eroded by the machine learning. What's your view?
We'd better hurry up and finish this podcast so I can get back and do all the editing I need to do to accumulate the money that I'm going to need when AI takes my job away. Yeah. Okay, so we don't know that AI is going to decimate jobs. There is in scenario terms, there's a very plausible scenario in which people, basically have nothing to do productive or to get money, to get paid. There are lots of other scenarios. Kurt Vonnegut Jr. wrote Player Piano, which was basically saying the same thing about bedrock industry. And he wrote that 60 years ago, and it didn't happen. On the other hand, past performance is no guarantee of future performance in the stock market or anywhere else. My opinion is that there will always be more things for people to do, not necessarily for pay. As long as there are people, there will be other people who need people or who need to help them. One really interesting indicator will be as AI systems come into companies, do they actually lay people off because the jobs go away, or do they find other things to do? And another interesting question is, are there a limited number of economic things to do? So a couple sort of data points from very different places. There was a man named Joseph Ellis, who was a analyst in the retail markets, and he plotted the coefficients that determine the level of middle classness of a society and its prosperity, and he turned out that the health of the middle class was a leading indicator of prosperity, almost routinely. And it makes sense, right? When rich people have money, they spend it, but they don't. There aren't enough of them. When poor people do well, they spend it, but it's largely on subsistence items. So it doesn't go as far in rejuvenating the economy. But when middle-class people have discretionary income, they spend it in a variety of different ways, goods and services, and that raises the quality of everything and raises the value. One of the issues with the middle class is that leads to various things being inflated. So that's one thing. Another thing is we haven't yet seen the influence of demographics. For instance, will there be a need for robotics to take care of the elderly, that kind of thing. But the third is what I call the sort of artisanal nature of creative work. So if I was writing a book, 300 years ago, a management book, I would be writing it for my friend. And if my friends were influential, the book might be influential, but it wouldn't sell that many copies. The printing presses couldn't handle that many copies. If I was writing a book 70 years ago, same book, it would be better written and it would be aimed at a larger audience. And I would be interested in who reviewed it and how those reviews were, and did the Times cover it, and was it, featured here and there. And I would be trying to make my reputation by selling copies. Steve Persanti, who founded the business book publishing house, Barrett Kohler, pointed out and that would have held well until about 2005. But the number of books printed today in 2025 is the same as the number of books printed in 2005.
Really? Gosh.
Yeah.
Is that
Which
because they
means
got digital?
the number of books read is the same as the number of books read in 2005. But the
Wow.
number of titles
Mm,
is about 100 times as much.
yeah. Everything's
So
online.
my goal is now, it's not the small community I had, and it's not the broad mass. It is more like, if the broad mass is like, Budweiser or a major beer company, I would be like an artisanal beer maker. I wouldn't be just limited to the people in my neighborhood, but my audience depends on who has heard of me through who has heard of me. So I'm delighting people.
Mm.
Delight is the currency that carries a book.
And
I'm delighting people one at a time and passing largely through word of mouth, and counting on there being enough people delighted, regardless of what I produce, that I can support myself through interaction with them.
so that's like radical localization, radical community, radical clustering across the system, which has impacts for, you can take it up. Nation states become city states. City states become village states. I am a village. I'm supported by the people who I delight and who I exchange services with, and I make stuff or do stuff for that radical community around me, which is a sort of...
Which is building on, I
Okay.
think, conversations we had with Harry Popper, where his guidance for people was sort of go deep into AI or go completely anti-AI into sort of human crafts and become a potter. I think Geoffrey
Yeah.
Hinton's piece was become a plumber. So it's sort of into these things that are more craft, more hand focused. Yeah.
And it's not geographical anymore. Like, it's not my Brooklyn neighborhood or my neighborhood in this small town in Ohio or a college town neighborhood. I'm an artisanal beer maker, but I have no constraints on distribution.
You're global.
I'm global, but
Yeah.
I'm artisanal. It's a neighborhood. It's
Yeah.
just my neighbors are all over the place. When we did scenarios for the pandemic, if the pandemic had continued, that would be the extent of cultural connection. People would live in gated communities, and it would be very hard to come in face to face. Fortunately, the COVID did not evolve that way, but there was a moment at which it seemed like it might. And so now we have a different issue with AI and provenance. Will the technology exist to allow us to tell when something is created by AI and when it's not, and what its provenance is? Answer is maybe. If that doesn't exist, will there be some sort of central source of truth that people can rely on, possibly using blockchain or, following a Wikipedia-like model? Maybe, maybe not. If it doesn't come to pass, will people be able to psychologically handle it? Maybe, maybe not. Or will we end up in sort of gated communities of truth?
Yeah.
Gated communities where different communities have different sets of facts. And will those be geographic, or will those be, artisanal around the world? And then, regardless if that's the case, will I still be able to make a living as a writer because I've found a community, or will the whole race to the bottom fueled by AI be strong enough and complete enough that basically whoever we are, whatever we do, if we're not caring for elderly people in a way that we're not raising children or giving people comfort nor massaging, we're going to be out of a job. That seems unlikely to me because human beings are infinitely resourceful and experimental. So we'll find ways to make money and do things of value.
Yeah.
But there is a dystopian future where, despite finding the people who have money are unwilling to spend money on anyone but themselves. And that becomes now a critical driving force.
It does. I mean, gated communities are a thing, but the people with money, you see the research is the biggest concern is always their security and their future. And if you've got massive disproportionate spread of wealth and access to resources and so on, you suddenly have a security issue within society. And there's 7 billion people on the planet. That's a huge security. So things either become very gated and you live behind large walls and you don't let anybody else in, or you find yourself in an extreme situation where everything is insecure and chaotic and nobody has peace. And at the end of the day, you want to find a middle ground.
There is a third. So security doesn't necessarily come from the point of a gun or a wall. There is security. Basically, security is the complement of trust. What does it take to trust your surroundings? Throughout human history, it's been, I trust who I know, and I only know who I trust. And now we know many more people than we trust. The number of people that we know is way more, if you include your internet pals.
Yeah.
Huge compared to any other time in history. Therefore, even for celebrities in the past. What then do we do about trust? What do we do about trust in institutions? If something cannot go on forever, it will stop. And lack of trust cannot go on forever. It has to be either gated and bounded, or it has to be replaced by a basic willingness to trust institutions and people. In order for them to be trusted, they have to be trustworthy. So then there has to be a way of evaluating openly whether people and institutions are trustworthy. And we're back to explainability and transparency. Is there, John Brunner's book, The Shockwave Rider, which was 1975, basically posited a future in which all secrets were open, engineered through technological change. And when I was teaching the scenario class, back in I have been teaching it for a long time. When I was teaching it in the 1990s, I would say to the class, okay, imagine it's the future and you're married, happily married, you have children. It would be terrible for everybody if your marriage broke apart, and yet you commit an indiscretion and you are seen leaving the wrong house at the wrong time with the wrong person. It's the future, so you're seen by a surveillance camera, and the surveillance camera is tied to the internet, and it automatically uploads a photograph of you, and your cousin has a command that automatically picks up any of their acquaintances and relatives and tags them, and all of a sudden your face is all over the internet. Is that a better or a worse world than the one we live in today? And to a person, the class members said it would be better. It would be a better world because everybody would know everything. We wouldn't be anxious. We wouldn't have to keep secrets. Wow. Okay, that's late 1990s. I asked the same question in 2010. Same thing, indiscretion, picked up by surveillance cameras, posted on the internet. Better or worse world? First of all, everybody says that's not the future. We're living there.
We're there already.
It's here. And that was 15 years ago. And it's terrible. It is a terrible world because it's not even that our privacy is invaded, are unable, the consequences outweigh. So can AI, because AI systems can't care, they can't have discretionary forgiveness. Or if they do, it's because they've picked up the logic on what is forgivable from human data, human civilization, from conventional wisdom. And that's even worse because conventional wisdom does not forgive anybody.
So maybe to bring us back up to something you said as a sort of closing point. So you said that one of the key things of what the future looks like will be dependent upon the technology companies, and then you sort of followed that with they need to self-regulate, but we can't trust them to self-regulate. So say more, I guess, on where you see that going in that case, and then we'll wrap things up.
Yeah, and I know I've taken us all over the map, but you asked terrific questions. I really had a great time in this interview. I hope it comes across. I believe in discretionary forgiveness. I believe, so when you say, what will the effects of AI be? That to me depends on the answer. Will human beings develop the capacity to manage this incredible tool, this incredible, dangerous, wonderful device? Will we evolve to meet the tools that we've developed? And the same is true about risk, technological risk in general. Will we evolve to forgive? One of the horror stories took place in the Netherlands over the last 15 years. It was there was a scandal about misuse of, abuse of child welfare funds, and it was a group of Bulgarians basically stole money from the Dutch government. So the Dutch government put in place a discretionary or a predictive analytics system to figure out who is likely to steal child support in the future, who is likely to do welfare fraud. And the analytics system identified innocent people, people of Moroccan origin, people of Turkish origin, single parents, people who knew people from those backgrounds. So all of a sudden, this whole large group of people, I think it was 26,000, were denied benefits without real inquiry because they fit a stereotype that the AI system had developed. And about 1,500 children were forcibly separated from their parents. But the families, 15 years later, have still not gotten restitution, last I heard. The scandal has just gone on and on and on, with lives ruined. The children who were separated are now, adults in their 30s or 40s. That's an example of what AI systems can do. And that was in the Netherlands. If we had to say, what are the countries we'd most like to move to because they are free of abuse and corruption, the Netherlands would be at the top of my list.
Absolutely.
And, so what is going on in the countries that are hiding it?
Yeah.
Or hiding it more systematically, or less prone to exposure? And how do we learn as a society, as a group of institutions, to raise our judgment, discretion, empathy, and forgiveness concurrent with the tools we have that can select which people to enable and which people to oppress? How do we raise our awareness enough to match our new capabilities? I think that's the question that deserves answer think, governments should be asking that question if they ever get to a point of accountability. Corporations should be asking that question. Social activists interested in AI should focus on, or are already focusing on, this question, but they could do it more systematically and more in touch. I think it's going to take everything humanity has to raise humanity's level of empathy and forgiveness. Not to forgive everyone, not to be empathetic, at a fault, but to have the appropriate level of judgment and care to to really rise to our better natures. That's what humanity is being called to do right now. Will we? By what date?
That's a key question. So we've covered a lot. It's been an incredible conversation. I think we could probably still go on for several more hours. I've still got a long list of
Please.
questions. So we started from your view on curiosity, so being a willingness to entertain items not in our philosophy, and sort of being curiosity being around how children work. We went into how curiosity has driven you through some of your work of Age of Heretics, some of the history of good management. We went into sort of social scientists and shared vision, and then we dived into the AI dilemma. And we had your 7 risks in there around being intentional about the risk to humans, around open the closed box, reclaiming data rights for people, confronting and questioning bias, holding stakeholders accountable, favoring loose coupled systems, and embracing that creative friction. We then had the 8th one that didn't make it into the book, but is a super important one around misinformation. And then we looked, of those that were all super important, but maybe that opening the closed box, that transparency of knowing really what's going on behind the scenes is so important, and how ultimately those large language models are people pleasers, that they're there to give us the answers that we want, but all the challenges that come with that. We dived into empathy, and how I had always looked at empathy as a positive, but actually you framed it that empathy actually can be positive, but also we need to think about it. It can be used to arguably manipulate people, of understanding people, and actually behind empathy is the very human trait of caring, how important that is. And we talked about how we anthropomorphize AI, some of the beliefs that you shared around all humanity being of value, how people have choices and that being a good thing, and how we should grow up without trauma, and that maybe we're reaching a tipping point around some of those beliefs. We dived into the impact of AI potentially on the middle classes and what that may or may not mean, and potentially a plausible scenario of where it could impact. And then, some of the indicators that we maybe need to look for, or the early warning signs of, what are organizations going to do as they take advantage of AI? Are they going to lay off people, or are they going to find more work for those people? And I love the question you posed, actually, are there a limited number of sort of economic things to do, or actually will we be able to create more economic things to do as a result of AI? The health of the middle classes being an indicator of prosperity in the past. So maybe actually we empower the middle classes and that carries through. We talked about books. We talked about gated communities of truth, and how maybe as humans we're infinitely resourceful, and maybe that will carry us through this. And then I loved that final question. So how do we learn to raise judgment, empathy, and forgiveness in humans? So amazing conversation.
Conversation. I mean, I'm absolutely taken with the fact that we come back to these kind of philosophical basis of things like the golden rule, and how his challenge of us, we're facing AI, we're facing massive change to society, we're facing the sort of all those new ways of doing things, maybe very old ways of doing things. But the challenge is, how do we maintain our humanity and raise our game in order for all of us to survive, rather than a nightmare scenario? But he raises more questions than
answers, but maybe that is the answer. To question is the answer. That's our final chapter.
I also love the artisanal thing. We hear that more, and it's such a trend. It's such a weak signal, if you like. When we talk about construction in our book, and the need to construct our realities and construct things that we curious about and learn by doing and learning by making, also has impact on the artisanal nature of things. We're all going to be making more stuff, maybe for groups around us, maybe for smaller communities, but then networked globally and so on.
I like the way that actually that could go global. It would be artisanal, but it would be with global reach.
Yeah.
So it's been an amazing conversation. Huge thank you, Art, for joining us. And with that, let me wrap things up for today. So this series is all about how individuals and organizations use the power of curiosity to drive success in their lives and businesses, especially in the context of our new digital reality. So it brings to life the latest understanding from neuroscience, anthropology, history, business, and behaviorism about curiosity, and it makes these useful for everyone. You've been listening to Curious Advantage podcast, and we're curious to hear from you. So if you found something valuable from the conversation today, please do leave a review. It does mean a lot to us, and give it those 5 stars on whatever platform. And do share it with a colleague or friend who you think would enjoy today's episode. Also, don't forget you can watch the full conversation on our YouTube channel, subscribe for more episodes, for shorts, behind-the-scenes clips from our guests. You also learn more about the Curious Advantage at our website, curiousadvantage.com, and follow the Curious Advantage on LinkedIn for updates, podcasts, insights, future episodes, and curious conversations. And the Curious Advantage book is available on Amazon worldwide. So if you haven't got it already, order your physical, digital, or audio book copy now, and you can further explore the 7 C's model that we have for being more curious. Don't forget to subscribe on your favorite podcast service, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you listen. Keep exploring curiously, and we will see you next time.